Good morning, and welcome to Redeemer Lutheran Church. I'm Pastor Gary Lodehold. This week of Pastor Gary Live Moments comes from an offhanded remark I made to the folks in my Bible study class that most of us skip over one of the most important parts of our Bibles and never read it. My point was that most of us never read the introduction or the preface to our Bibles. And we should, because there is important information there to help us understand the Bible. At other times, folks have come to me asking about what Bible they should get for their use. Well, that's not an easy question either. Some Bibles are great for deep study, and others are designed more for devotional reading. While the translation is important, I might say to people, equally important are the helps the Bible has. Are there maps, and are they helpful maps? Are there comments in the margins to help you understand what you are reading? Are there additional articles to guide your understanding? Those kinds of questions are important to ask of any Bible. As for today, we are in some ways continuing to consider the question that we began yesterday. Is the Bible one book or many? That's a question the preface of my Bible asks, and this week I am summarizing that preface as a way of showing you the importance of reading the one in your Bibles. Yesterday, we talked about the many types of literature in the Bible and all the scrolls of sacred writings that were collected together to make up the Bible. That might make one think that the Bible is many books. Well, the problem is actually worse than that, at least according to the preface in my Bible. You see, some parts of the Bible reflect a narrative that spans across several of the smaller books. The first one that comes to mind is called the Pentateuch, a word that means 5 scrolls. When we speak of the Pentateuch, we mean Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy, or the first 5 books of the Bible. For Jewish believers, these are really the only pure scriptures, and the rest of what we call the Old Testament is explanation or commentary on what we find in those first 5 books. A second narrative collection, then, begins with Joshua and goes all the way through the book of Kings. A third collection that tells much of the same story as Joshua through Kings, but from a different perspective, is found in Chronicles, Ezra, and Nehemiah. The existence of these groupings, particularly those that tell similar stories to each other, suggests to scholars that these groupings existed and were being circulated separately at one point before they were collected into what we now call the Bible. On top of that, some scholars believe that some major narrative stories were also circulated separately as well. Some examples might be the long story of Joseph that we find at the end of Genesis, or the stories surrounding King David. When you add to that some of the stories in the Bible come from a time when no one was around to write them down, we begin to wonder, how did all this come together? For the past several hundred years, scholars have begun to notice some differences in writing style, use of language, and ideas in different parts of the Bible. For example, in the first 5 books of the Bible, there are some stories in which God is almost always referred to as Yahweh, and other passages where God is consistently referred to with the word Elohim. Scholars began to believe that the passages with Yahweh were written by one author, and the passages with Elohim were written by another. They also noticed that there was another group of passages that seemed focused on rules for priests and the temple, and so that seemed to be from another writer. Then there seems to be still another writer who folded this all into a narrative. That kind of thing happens all over the Bible, particularly in the Old Testament. Written stories, oral traditions, laws and proverbs, hymns and prayers were all blended together into one. Many stories and many perspectives were brought together to make up our Bible. Maybe it's a little bit like our churches. When we gather for worship, we are many different people, each with our own viewpoints, each with our own understandings and experiences of God. And yet we come together united in our worship, united in our need for God's grace, united in receiving God's grace. Our shared view of God is enriched, corrected, and recentered by one another. So perhaps by now we are beginning to grasp an answer to the question that began yesterday. Is the Bible one book or many? The preface to my Bible raises just a few more issues before we can draw a conclusion. That's our topic for tomorrow. Thanks for watching, and remember to let this day belong to God.